Okay, think about that really crucial moment. You've just left treatment, maybe a hospital bed or even jail after dealing with substance use or mental health challenges.
Yeah.
So much going on, right? But there's this huge question, where do you live next? And that decision, that exact moment of transition, well, it can honestly make or break your whole recovery journey.
It's a really stark reality.
Yeah,
Having secure housing is just fundamental. It's a vital piece of recovery.
absolutely.
But, the data, it tells us about a third of people entering addiction treatment say they're in unstable living situations. That's a huge barrier right there.
And that's exactly where recovery residences, you probably know them as sober living homes, that's where they've become such a critical solution.
Hmm.
But this leads to the big question for you, our listener. There are so many options out there. How do you really know if a sober living home is truly safe, if it's ethical, if it's actually focused on recovery?
Right. And that's precisely where things like certification and established best practices come in. They're really designed to help make it easier for you to spot and, trust quality support.
Exactly. So, our mission today in this deep dive is to really unpack what recovery residences are. Why are they so effective? And maybe most importantly, what specific things, what characteristics and services, the ones backed up by solid research and national standards, what leads to the best outcomes.
Yeah, we'll be looking at insights from big national groups like SAMHSA's, it's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration,
Right.
and also research from places like the Recovery Research Institute, plus some practical examples from specific recovery housing networks.
Okay, so we've just kind of set the stage, the critical need for safe housing. Now, let's really get into what makes a recovery residence different. What makes it more than just, a roof over your head.
Mm.
When we talk about these recovery residences, what's the core definition?
Right. So essentially, when we're talking about recovery housing, we mean a place that's safe, that's healthy, it feels kind of like family, and it's absolutely substance-free.
Okay.
These are living environments specifically designed to support people in recovery from addiction. And they're really centered on peer support and connecting residents to services that help promote long-term recovery. The idea is that the entire setting, the place itself, acts as a support system.
So it's not just a place where you don't use substances.
Exactly.
It's a place to actively recover. That feels like a really powerful difference. For someone listening, what's maybe the biggest misconception about what that recovery part looks like day to day in a home like this?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And how does this social model of recovery really change that whole experience?
I think the misconception often is that it's just, rules and making sure people abstain.
Yeah.
But the social model, it's really about cultivating these positive pro-social bonds, building a real sense of community,
Mm-hmm.
and creating a recovery supportive environment where the setting itself is actually a service.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Think of it less like a classroom where a teacher gives you answers and more like a community where everyone learns and grows together
Ah, okay.
by supporting each other, sharing experiences, holding each other accountable. It's the community itself that really drives the recovery process.
Right.
The core principles guiding it are things like kindness, guidance, nurturing, empathy, being a role model, trust, belonging,
Yeah.
but also accountability, grace, and responsibility.
That makes sense.
And it really values experiential knowledge. That's the wisdom you gain from actually living through recovery. It promotes peer-to-peer connections, mutual aid. The whole atmosphere encourages people to participate in whatever recovery pathway they choose. And the key thing is, recovery is the common bond.
It sounds like it really aims to be a supportive family, almost, but outside your actual family.
Yeah, in a way.
And what's the actual tangible impact? Like, what does the research show? Why is this kind of housing so important?
Well, the results are pretty compelling. They show clear benefits. Research points to decreased substance use, a lower chance of returning to use, lower incarceration rates, higher income, more employment, and even improved family relationships.
Wow. Okay. Those are some really significant life changes. Can you give us maybe a concrete example?
Sure. There was one study comparing residents in Oxford houses to people getting sort of standard care.
Okay.
It found the Oxford House residents had significantly lower substance use, like 31.3% compared to almost 65%.
Huge difference.
Yeah. And they also had much higher monthly income, nearly $990 versus $440 on average. And lower incarceration rates, too, only 3% versus 9%.
Wow.
In fact, they estimated the economic benefit of living in an Oxford house was around $29,000 per resident over 2 years when you factor in various costs.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and these places seem particularly helpful for folks just coming out of inpatient treatment or jail, especially in that really early recovery phase.
Those stats for Oxford House are really impressive. But thinking about that model, peer-run democratic, are there maybe potential challenges? Or individuals who might, not thrive as much in that specific setup? It's all about the right fit,
That's
right?
a really vital point, yeah. While that peer-run model works incredibly well for a lot of people, it does rely heavily on the residents taking collective responsibility.
Right.
So for someone who needs maybe a bit more structure right at the beginning, or perhaps someone dealing with co-occurring mental health stuff that needs more professional oversight, well, a different level of support might be a better fit.
Okay.
And that brings us to a really key idea. Not all recovery residences are the same. And that's where the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, NARIR, comes in. They have this framework outlining different levels of support.
Ah, okay. So NARAR provides some structure to understand the differences. Can you walk us through those levels?
Absolutely. NARIR defines 4 main levels. Level 1, that's like the Oxford House that we just talked about. They're peer-run, democratically governed, no paid staff on site usually. The emphasis is all on peer accountability and mutual support.
Got it. So really hands-off from a professional standpoint, but heavy on the community aspect. What if someone needs a bit more guidance? What's the next step up, like level 2? Those are often called sober living homes, right?
Exactly. Level 2 facilities, and you mentioned living by design as an example earlier, they tend to be more structured. Often there's a resident house manager. They might get compensated with free or reduced rent or fees.
Okay.
Residents still have a say. They participate in governance alongside staff. These homes typically encourage house meetings, peer recovery supports, and they help connect residents to outside clinical services if needed.
Right.
And like you said, living by design is a level 2 place, and that level is often seen as really good for early recovery because it strikes that balance between structure and peer support.
And then what if someone needs even more structure or maybe some on-site professional help?
So then you've got level 3. These residences offer a more structured daily schedule, support with life skills. You'll usually find a paid house manager, administrative support, often a certified peer recovery support specialist.
Okay.
They might even offer some on-site life skills training, either peer-led or professional. And then finally, there's level 4. These include places like therapeutic communities. They require clinical oversight, maybe monitoring, and the stays are typically shorter.
Right.
These places have paid staff who are licensed or credentialed, and they provide clinical services right there on site.
So it's definitely not one size fits all. It's really a spectrum of support. And finding that right level seems crucial, balancing what someone needs with their own choices.
Exactly.
But with all this variety, I mean, how do we, as listeners or someone looking for a place, how do we even start to make sure a home is actually high quality?
That is the critical question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is exactly where certification becomes so important. It's kind of like the gold standard.
Okay, so why does certification, like from TOHN in Texas, which you mentioned is affiliated with NARIR's, why does that matter so much for someone actually looking for a home right now?
Well, it's really seen as a key solution to the problem of, wildly varying quality and sometimes, unfortunately, unethical practices.
Right.
When a home is certified, it basically means it's passed an inspection. It meets national standards for quality, for ethics, for accountability.
Okay.
So for you, the listener, or maybe for a case manager or treatment team referring someone, it gives you confidence. Confidence that the home is stable, it's transparent, and it's really focused on the residents, not just, trying to fill beds.
That's a really strong point. So what does that certification actually mean in practice? Like what tells you this place meets the standard?
It means things like no drugs allowed on site, obviously. Clear house rules and resident rights are written down and followed. The staff have received training. And there's a genuine focus on long-term recovery, not just making a profit. It's fundamentally about raising the floor for sober living quality.
Raising the floor, I like that. And what are some of those specific requirements that help establish that floor? What do certified homes have to do?
Well, certified homes need to have things like transparent admissions processes and clear fee structures. They need established drug testing protocols. They absolutely must have written resident rights and grievance policies, a way for residents to raise concerns safely.
Crucial.
Yeah. Regular staff training is required, and proper documentation and reporting systems, too. It's all designed to make sure there's a consistent, safe, and genuinely supportive environment.
That sounds like a really solid framework. Now, beyond just the certification itself, you mentioned SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They've also laid out best practices for recovery housing,
That's right.
kind of like the playbook for what a really effective home should be doing. Let's start with the idea of being recovery-centered. That sounds basic, but what does it really mean in practice? You mentioned 4 dimensions.
Yeah, Sandwich really emphasizes that homes need to be fundamentally recovery-centered. And that aligns directly with Sandwich's own definition of recovery, which is about improving health and wellness, living a self-directed life, and really striving to reach your full potential.
Okay.
And this breaks down into 4 key dimensions. First is health. That means not just abstaining from substances, but also making overall healthy choices.
Right.
Second is home, providing that safe, stable place to live we talked about. Third is purpose, helping residents engage in meaningful daily activities like work or school, and also fostering what they call reciprocal responsibilities.
Reciprocal responsibilities. What does that entail?
It means everyone contributes to the household.
Mm,
Doing chores, supporting fellow residents, holding each other accountable gently. It's about being an active part of the community, not just a passive recipient.
got it.
And the fourth,
The fourth is community actively cultivating those supportive, family-like social networks within the house and connecting residents to the broader recovery community outside. It's about providing support and, importantly, hope.
So it really is about treating the whole person, not just the addiction, and living those values day to day. What other, maybe more operational or ethical points does SAMHS highlight as crucial?
well, they also stress the need to promote person-centered, individualized, and strength-based approaches,
Okay.
which means decisions about care and living should be based on your unique needs, preferences, and goals. That includes having choices in living arrangements, like gender-aligned housing options, if that's important to you.
Right.
Another absolutely critical best practice is to ensure quality, integrity, and resident safety. And a part of that is explicitly rejecting what's known as patient brokering.
Ah, yes. You touched on this. It sounds really awful.
What is, it's a really serious ethical violation, where homes or third parties basically pay kickbacks to get residents referred to them.
Wow.
And this can lead to terrible consequences, lower quality care, higher overdose rates, even situations where there's an incentive to keep people struggling, not recovering, just to keep the money flowing. The Department of Justice has actually prosecuted these kinds of schemes.
That's genuinely horrifying. It just hammers home why trust and transparency are so, so vital.
Absolutely.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many people get caught up in that? It's a stark reminder of what's really at stake here.
It really is.
So, thinking about the complexities of recovery, how do good homes address things beyond just substance use, like mental health?
That's another key point from SAMHS. Quality homes must integrate co-occurring and trauma-informed approaches.
Okay.
I mean, the data shows millions of people, 24.5 million back in 2021, had both mental health and substance use disorders happening at the same time.
Wow, that many.
Yeah. So good homes need policies that reflect how common this is. And crucially, they need to operate in a way that avoids re-traumatizing people who've already been through a lot.
Makes sense. What else?
Also, they must establish and share clear written policies. Things need to be down on paper, easy to read, usually in a handbook that the resident gets and signs. And this should cover everything from house rules and expectations to, importantly, resident rights like freedom from abuse or neglect, freedom from forced labor, privacy rights, and a clear process for filing a grievance if something's wrong.
And we already touched on certification being a best practice. What about the actual methods or treatments supported within these homes? Are there any specific policies there that are really critical?
Yes, quality homes should promote evidence-based practices. NEAR-certified homes, for example, are generally considered evidence-based in their approach.
Okay.
This often includes ensuring residents have access to things like outpatient treatment, which research shows helps with abstinence, employment, and reduces arrests, and also connections to other supportive services like healthcare, help finding jobs, social services, things like that.
Right.
And a really, really crucial point is around medication policies. SAMHS is clear. Recovery housing should not create barriers for residents who are using prescribed medications for behavioral health or physical health conditions.
Including medications for addiction treatment itself.
Absolutely. That includes FDA-approved medications for opioid use disorder or MODI, things like buprenorphine, methadone, naltrexone. Residents should be supported in taking those if prescribed.
That's so important.
It is. Now, homes should have sensible strategies to manage any risk of diversion.
Yeah.
Medication being misused, like using lock boxes for storing meds, proper staff training on policies. But the key is support, not barriers.
Really vital distinction. Okay, lastly, how do these homes actually know if they're doing a good job? Is there any accountability for results?
There should be. The final best practice is to evaluate program effectiveness. Good homes should be tracking how they're doing
How?
by collecting data on key outcomes, things like sustained recovery rates among residents, employment numbers, any criminal justice involvement, how residents transition to permanent housing afterwards, and importantly, resident satisfaction. Are the people living there feeling supported?
Right.
This data isn't just for show. It helps them understand what's working, what's not, and it can also be really important for securing funding.
Okay, so we've covered the ideal standards, the certifications, the best practices. But what does the actual research on the ground tell us about what works best in practice?
Right.
The Recovery Research Institute did this really interesting study, and honestly, some of the findings kind of surprised me. What did they uncover when they looked at those 49 sober living houses in California?
Yeah, that study looked at 330 residents, and importantly, many of them were considered higher risk individuals, maybe involved with the criminal justice system.
Okay.
And they found some really fascinating associations. One key finding was about organizational affiliations,
Meaning?
meaning houses that were connected to larger organizations or maybe affiliated with specific treatment programs or had formal referral agreements with parole or probation offices. Those houses tended to have better outcomes.
Better how?
More residents achieving abstinence, higher employment rates, and fewer arrests among their residents,
Huh.
which kind of suggests that being part of a larger, more robust, recovery-oriented system of care might be beneficial. More resources, smoother handoffs, maybe.
That makes a lot of intuitive sense, yeah. More
Uh,
connections, more support structures. What about the physical size of the house? Did that seem to matter?
Capacity did show up as significant. They found that smaller houses defined as 10 or fewer residents were associated with increased employment for residents.
Interesting.
But on the flip side, larger houses, 21 or more residents, were associated with decreased employment.
Why do you think that might be?
Well, the researchers speculated it could be a few things. Maybe a better resident-to-staff ratio in smaller places. Or maybe smaller homes just attract a different demographic of residents to begin with, folks who are perhaps further along or have different employment situations. It's hard to say definitively from this study.
Okay. And what about the program's philosophy, specifically around things like 12-step programs?
That was another interesting finding. Homes that describe themselves as primarily or completely 12-step oriented showed links to greater total abstinence and higher employment among residents.
Wow.
And specifically, requiring residents to attend AA or NA meetings was linked to increased abstinence rates.
Okay. Any other requirements that stood out?
Yeah, under intake requirements, they found that houses requiring at least 30 days of abstinence before someone could move in. Well, that requirement was associated with a decreased likelihood of residents getting arrested later on.
Okay. So on the other side of the coin, what didn't seem to make a significant difference in outcomes, according to this specific study, things that maybe people assume would matter.
Right, and this is where some common assumptions get challenged. Things like having a live-in manager, or whether the house provided meals, or even if they required drug testing right at intake. Those factors were not significantly correlated with the recovery outcomes they measured in this particular study.
That's actually quite surprising, especially the live-in manager part, maybe. Now, I know research always has layers and nuances. What's the really important caveat here, especially when you look at factors like, say, the monthly cost of a house? You'd think more expensive equals better, right?
That's a critical distinction they made. So yes, the study did find that some factors like higher monthly rent, over $600 a month in their sample, or being a male-only house, or having fewer residents currently on parole or probation, those were associated with better substance use outcomes.
Okay.
But, and this is the key part, the researchers suggested this might be less about the house itself and more about the recovery capital of the residents who end up in those houses.
Recovery capital, meaning what exactly?
Meaning the resources, financial, social, personal, that an individual already possesses when they enter the house. So someone who can afford a more expensive place or has fewer legal issues might already have more advantages or resources helping their recovery, separate from what the house itself provides.
Ah, okay. So the house characteristics might be correlated with resident characteristics.
Exactly. It kind of reframes how you might think about choosing a home, doesn't it? You need to look beyond just price tag or some of those surface level factors. It's more complex.
It really does. And did geography matter at all? Did it make a difference where these houses were located?
Yes, they did find some variation in outcomes depending on the specific geographic chapters of the sober living network they studied,
Huh.
which could reflect differences in the local community resources available in those areas, like job opportunities, strength of the recovery community, access to other services.
Right.
And it's really important to stress this again, these are all associations. The study found links, but it doesn't prove direct cause and effect.
Got it. Correlation, not necessarily causation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the researchers themselves called for more research to really nail down the direct impact of specific house characteristics.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what recovery residences are, the different levels, what makes a good one according to standards and research. But often there's a person helping guide someone through this whole complicated process, the case manager.
Yes, absolutely.
What exactly is their role in all of this? How do they fit in?
Yeah, think of a case manager as like your professional guide or advocate throughout the entire recovery journey.
Okay.
Their job is really to help tailor the treatment plan and future planning specifically to your unique needs and circumstances. They're often involved right from the initial assessment all the way through aftercare, providing that continuous support for, intentional growth and recovery.
So how does a case manager specifically help someone navigate the housing piece? Finding the right recovery residence, which, as we've discussed, can feel really overwhelming.
They play a huge role there. They're actively involved in helping create that recovery roadmap we talked about,
Right.
which definitely includes figuring out the most effective level of care, the right kinds of therapy, and the right kind of living environment, like a recovery residence. They offer really practical, hands-on support with the logistics of getting well. They can help you explore different housing options, understand the rules, maybe even help with applications sometimes.
Well, they help connect the dots.
Exactly. And they do it through shared decision-making, working with you to find the best fit.
And thinking longer term, beyond just finding the initial placement, how do they continue to support someone?
Well, they assist with setting goals and planning for the future, which studies show leads to people staying in treatment longer and becoming more self-reliant.
That makes sense.
And crucially, they are absolutely vital when it comes to aftercare planning, helping someone transition successfully out of maybe a higher level of care into a sober living community.
Acting as a bridge.
Precisely. They act as bridges, connecting you to all those important local recovery resources, support groups like AA or NA, maybe job placement services, ongoing medical care, mental health providers, whatever you need to keep building that recovery foundation.
Okay.
And they also provide that ongoing support for relapse prevention, kind of monitoring progress, checking in, and connecting you to the right help if challenges come up.
That sounds like an incredibly valuable relationship to have on your side during recovery.
It really can be.
So, for someone listening right now who might be working with a case manager or maybe expects to soon, what are some quick tips for making that relationship as effective as possible? How can you get the most out of it?
That's a great question. First and foremost, clear, open communication is key. Be honest about what you need, how you're doing, any struggles. And remember, those conversations are confidential.
Right?
Second, really try to actively collaborate. Don't just be passive. Participate in building your recovery plan. Ask questions. Share your own ideas and preferences.
Engage.
Exactly. Set realistic goals together that helps keep you motivated. Trying to stay organized with appointments, paperwork, that kind of stuff can also reduce stress for everyone.
Good tip.
And probably most importantly,
Oh,
follow through on the recommendations they give, but also provide feedback. Let them know what's working, what's not. It helps them help you better. And finally, just practice patience. Recovery is definitely a journey. There will be ups and downs. And don't ever hesitate to ask for more help or different resources if you need them. Case managers usually have pretty extensive networks.
So, pulling all of this together then, what does this all mean for you, the listener, if you're considering a recovery residence, maybe for yourself, maybe for someone you care about? It might feel like we've thrown a lot of information at you, especially if this is your first time navigating this world. But remember why we're focusing on these details. It's really about empowering you to make the best possible choice.
Exactly. It means making an informed choice is just paramount. It's so important. And maybe the simplest takeaway is this. Don't just ask if they have a bed available.
Right. What should you ask instead?
Ask about certification.
That's the critical first question. And based on everything we've talked about today, what are some other key questions you should definitely be asking a potential recovery home?
You should be asking things like, what levels of care do you support here? Is this home certified by a NAIR affiliate like TROHN here in Texas? Do they actually embrace those social model principles we discussed, that sense of community and peer support?
Okay.
What are their policies on medications, especially MOU? Do they integrate trauma-informed care approaches? And what are their connections like? Are they linked into the wider treatment and recovery community?
Those are great practical questions. Ultimately, it seems like understanding these standards, knowing about certification, and knowing how professional support like case management works, all of that can really empower you to find an environment that doesn't just house you, but truly protects, supports, and prepares you for whatever comes next in your recovery.
Absolutely. You know, recovery is fundamentally a process of intentional growth. And it's so much stronger when it's supported by community, by expert guidance, and by these kinds of validated best practices we've been discussing.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. If recovery is truly a journey of self-discovery and growth, what hidden strengths, what resilience might you uncover when you're living in an environment that's specifically designed not just for abstinence, but to actively foster your resilience and your connection to others?
That's a powerful question. And if you or someone you know is looking for quality recovery housing or support, you can certainly explore options. For example, Living by Design DFW, which we mentioned is TRHN certified here in Texas, is one option.
Right.
You can find them online at soberlivingdfw.com or call them at 844-SOBR-DFW. That's